Hello, welcome to my channel. Um, this is an educational channel where we go over different theories of everything primarily. And today is our 225th video where we're covering various aspects of the reciprocal system of theory. And this was a theory that was first derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He died back in 1990. The basic gist of the theory is that we live in a universe of motion. Not a universe of matter, not a universe of energy, but a universe of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time have three basic aspects that you need to be aware of. One is their coordinate aspect, coordinate space, three or more dimensions of space, x, y, z coordinates. But then there is also coordinate time, three or more dimensions of time. Space and time have a reciprocal relationship, which is where the name, the reciprocal system, comes from. And basically, you can think of phenomena as being a fraction, where you can think of motion as being a fraction where time or space is the numerator and space or time is the denominator. You can think of, think of the most basic motion that we can think of is speed. The bicycle is moving at 20 miles per hour. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time, space over time. That is a fraction that is a motion. And space and time have a reciprocal relationship there. You can see that if you try to double the speed. You could either say that the bike is now moving at 40 miles per hour. You multiply the space by 2, or you could say the bike is now moving at 20 miles per half hour, dividing the time by 2. That shows a reciprocal relationship between space and time in motion. Space and time do not really exist in and of themselves. They only exist together in motion. Now, I mentioned that space and time both have their coordinate aspects. They also both have their clock aspects. We're familiar with clock time. The clock is always getting later and later and later. But then there is also what Larson calls clock space. Again, because of the reciprocal relationship, space and time have the same qualities. So with clock space, the clock again is progressing. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. That is the progression of space. Just like how the progression of time is that the clock is always getting later and later and later. Then also, space and time both have their discrete unit aspect. They only come in discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. They're both very small, but they both do exist. And there's no continuity there. They come only in chunks. And actually, one chunk of space in one chunk of time is the speed of light. So that sets up a generalized, basically two sets of, two sectors of the universe. One that we're familiar with, where everything is moving slower than the speed of light, and then another that we're not familiar with, where things are moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls that the cosmic sector, and then the other is the material sector. Now, the material sector and the cosmic sector basically have a reciprocal relationship. In the material sector, you have coordinate space and clock time. We're familiar with that. 3 dimensions of space and a progressing time. But in the cosmic sector, we have coordinate time, 3-dimensional time, and clock space, progressing space. They are reciprocals of each other, and that is a powerful tool because you can extrapolate what you know upon what you don't know. So we know about the material sector. This is where our observations and measurements take place and where all scientific advancement comes from. But we can know just as much about the cosmic sector because the cosmic sector is identical on the general level, identical to the material sector, except that the roles of space and time are reversed. So we can extrapolate into the cosmic sector to discover more about it. Now that's just a short briefing on the reciprocal system. Right now we're going to do our first installment of reading what is called the Daniel Papers. And Daniel is a pseudonym. Daniel Phoenix III is a pseudonym for Dr. Bruce Perret. Dr. Perret passed away back in 2020, but before that he put out a great deal of material that some of which is quite speculative, but it's attempts to kind of improve upon Larson's reciprocal system. He actually came out with a system that he calls RS2, Reciprocal System 2. So in general, it starts out with the same basic postulates, but in some cases comes up with different answers, different proposals. I like the Daniel Papers. I like Bruce Perret's work in general. It's somewhat speculative and sometimes doesn't stay within the boundaries of the rules of the reciprocal system. But in general, I give him credit because he firmly understood the reciprocal system before he started going out and making all kinds of changes to it. He has a very good knowledge of the reciprocal system, and so I feel like he is got a license to, move out and do a few different things. Larson himself said that the reciprocal system itself is correct, but whether I have applied it correctly is a different question. And so that's how the reciprocal system works. He's got his basic postulates there, coordinate time and space, and clock time and space, and discrete units of time and space. And then he takes those and he deduces a theoretical universe. So Larson's universe is a theoretical universe, and then he reviews the literature, the legacy scientific literature, to determine what's what matches up with what, and so on. So Perret is familiar with that procedure, and he applies his knowledge, in some cases knowledge of other topics, to the reciprocal system. Now, Perret claims, I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but Daniel Phoenix III was his moniker when he worked for the, I guess, the government, or as a contractor for the, I guess you would say, the Philadelphia experiment, or the Montauk Project, which was a top secret government project back in the 80s. And they were experimenting with time travel. And, there's a connection with the 1940s also. You can read up on some of that from some of the other people that have written about it, Duncan Cameron and Al Bielek. But Daniel claims that he was a young member of that group, one of the computer programmers And so he attempts to speak from experience about what went on there at the Montauk labs or whatever. And so we're going to get into 4 separate papers that he wrote that are called the Anthropology series. The first one is called Geochronology, Hiding History in the Past. Okay, so this is Daniel Phoenix 3, starting with the introduction of Geochronology, Hiding History in the Past, part 1 of the Anthropology series on the hidden origins of Homo sapiens, using reciprocal system of theory techniques. Introduction. One of the advantages of being a subcontractor for black ops projects is that you often overhear the strangest things. Things that sound like science fiction or a good Halloween story, but you soon learn are very serious topics, and you need to keep your mouth shut until you are well away from the situation. And when you are poking around in history with the Phoenix 3 experiment, or Phoenix 3 equipment, a lot of unexpected things turn up. And so is the case with the origins of man. Jonathan Glassner and Brad White, hold on to your hats because you are a lot closer than you realized. These papers discuss anthropology, the study of the origins and behavior of Homo sapiens, developing a radically different worldview that will not only make anthropologists scream in horror, but will make religious folks want to bring back burning at the stake. The proposed theory is a common denominator to a lot of other research, mythologies, and doctrine. It is said that there is some truth in everything, but in this case, a lot more truth than anyone ever realized. Just happens that a few things got lost in the translation over the generations. And that is what this paper attempts to correct. When Dewey Larson created his reciprocal system of physical theory, he clearly defined what he wanted to accomplish, to define the physical universe. He set out using basic deductive and inductive reasoning processes to achieve his goal. When finished, he had a very powerful theory of everything that could explain the smallest photon to the largest supergalaxy, except there was one problem. There were still things that existed and were observed in everyday life that his theory could not explain. Things like biologic life, extrasensory abilities, and the realm of ethics. So he took all these concepts and threw them into his think tank, so-called, removed everything that could be explained by his reciprocal system of physical theory, then took an objective look at what was left. The result of those leftover bits became his book, Beyond Space and Time, which we've gone over the entire book in previous videos. I think it's approximately video 20 to a video 110 or something like that. Okay, the result of those leftover bits became his book Beyond Space and Time, which discusses the concepts remaining in that think tank that cannot be explained directly by his physics. Beyond Space and Time was Larson's last book. He died before it was published. And after he removed the pieces covering biology, basic metaphysics, and ethics, there was still stuff remaining in that think tank for future researchers to figure out. I am taking a similar approach with these anthropology papers, which is not about digging up old bones, but an attempt to put together a theory of origins of mankind using religious, scientific, and mythological data under the common framework of Dewey Larson's reciprocal system, which has proved to be very effective in explaining the inexplicable over the last half century. It is my hope that pointing out some alternatives to unquestioned beliefs, we can take a similar approach with our mythological systems that Larson did with the physical universe. Clean up the misunderstandings, take an honest look at what is left, and develop a theory from that premise as natural consequence. And what is left in that think tank is going to be the really interesting stuff, for it will provide the opportunity to open an unexpected door to our future. Okay, now the next section is called Geologic History. We've all been told about the Earth being billions of years old, with mankind not showing his Cro-Magnon face until about 50,000 years ago. Unless you've got a TARDIS or Bill and Ted's phone booth parked in the garage, who is going to question that? I wasn't around back then, and neither was anyone I know. So we just accept what we've been told by the experts, as usual. Guess what? Everything you know is wrong. Geologic dating, also known as radiometric dating, gives us our geochronology that is based on radioactive decay rates. Sounds all well and good, with one exception, pointed out by our old friend Dewey Larson. In his discovery that radioactive decay is actually a temporal explosion, an explosion in 3D time, coordinate time, not space, as conventionally believed. The rotational structure of the atom existing in coordinate time explodes and scatters its pieces around in three-dimensional time. As our clock time proceeds, we just run into the bits and pieces of the atom that physics views as radioactive emission. Same location in space, the atom, but different locations in time, the emission. A rough analogy would be to take a bag of marbles, rotations in the atomic time region. Now, the time region is when you are inside a unit of space. Within a unit of space, now we said space and time are both quantized, or they both come in only discrete units. So when you are less than 1 unit of space, you do not have space. You only have time, because you need at least 1 unit of space to have space. And inside of 1 unit of space, you have time only. That is what Larson calls the time region. And that is the region of the atom. And over in the cosmic sector, you have the same thing. Inside a unit of time, you have no time. You only have space, because it's got to be one or the other. And if you do not have time, then the only thing that you can have is space. And so within 1 unit of time, you have what Larson calls the space region. And this is the region of cosmic matter, or antimatter. Okay, back to Daniel. A rough analogy would be to take a bag of marbles, which are rotations in the atomic time region, and dump them out in a hallway. You dump them in one instance, like an explosion, But as you walk down the hallway, you run into the marbles as individual pieces at different clock times. From a purely spatial point of view, it looks like you have the bag in your hand all the time, and a marble jumps out of the bag and onto the floor when you get to the position where it came to a stop in coordinate time. When a large atom explodes in time, many pieces get scattered all over the coordinate time realm, some nearby and some quite far away. As a result of this distribution, the larger the explosion, the larger the error in clock time interpretation, what is known as the half-life. What science believes is millions of years is in reality only thousands of years. That consequence alone is enough to make most scientists' hair stand on end. But it is a natural consequence of the structure of the atom proposed by Larson in his reciprocal system. The second bad assumption is that once an atom becomes radioactive, it continues to decay until stable. This is not necessarily the case. The atom only has to throw off enough rotation to bring it back into the zone of isotopic stability, which it does in a single temporal explosion. The basic rotation of the atom is still intact, so it can continue to aggregate particles, charged neutrinos, that can build its mass back up to the point where another radioactive detonation is required to stabilize it. According to the physics texts, uranium-238 decays to lead-206 in a mere 4.47 billion years. That is how the age of the Earth is calculated. Now consider Larson's explanation. The first time you see a particle fly off U-238, the atom has thrown off all the particles it needed to become a stable atom again. Those particles are just scattered down the hallway across time and actually have nothing more to do with the atom itself. The atom goes back to behaving like a stable atom, and eventually enough particles collide with it to bring it into the unstable zone again. It explodes in time again and throws off more particles down the hallway. In the meantime, physicists are sitting around with their stopwatch measuring clock time, waiting for it to stop throwing off particles. Since the atom is exploding over and over again in 3D time, and they are waiting to stop running across particle debris down the hallway, they end up sitting around a long time, say 4.47 billion years, even though it only took a few thousand years to run across all the particles from the original explosion. These particles with a short half-life are the ones that don't make a very big temporal bang. So there is a good chance you will run across every marble in the hall and run out before it reaches the zone of isotopic stability again. But the larger the atom, the less chance there is of that happening, and the dating error becomes exponential. As we correct for these errors, we find that recent history is a bit more recent than we thought. With that new information, we can now make an accurate correlation to the records provided by mythology and various religious apocrypha, some of which provide enormous chronological detail. Now, I just want to make sure I'm looking at he's got a lot of footnotes here. Um, a lot of this is drawn from his Larson's chapter 24 of his book Basic Properties of Matter, which is the second volume of his 3-volume structure of the physical universe. Um, and I want to make clear that Larson, these conclusions about the dating, carbon dating or the radioactive dating, are not Larson's. This is Perret, you know, extending Larson. I can't say that I fully understand that marble analogy enough to buy into his theory here. I think I I'm inclined to believe it because I'm just not inclined to believe these gigantic numbers. 4.47 billion years. That's something that we can't really even comprehend. So I just, I'm just kind of not with all these astronomical numbers, whether it is huge amounts of light years or huge amounts of years. I like the fact that Perret is shortening all these things into more manageable space and times. But I can't say that I follow his derivation of his theories. But he does say, unlike conventional science, the reciprocal system postulates a theoretical universe based on motion, to which Larson derives consequences and compares to observation. Most conventional theories are the opposite. The theory is developed to specifically explain an observation, so many things are missed. With the marble analogy, only a portion of the marbles are scattered on the floor. Some remain in the bag. In the reciprocal system, it is called a mass limit. Your marbles can only weigh so much in the bag before you have to dump some out. Okay, well, that was a little bit helpful. So we just finished that section there on geochronology. And the next section is called calendars. Let me see. I think we are pretty much out of time. And we will get back to studying up on this next section of Daniel Phoenix III's paper on geochronology. And hope you come back. It's a pretty fascinating read. So, it's mind expanding. You don't have to believe everything, just let it wash over you. But it also does give you, an example and an ability to kind of think in reciprocal system terms and to be able to use the reciprocal system to in your own thinking. Okay, have a great day. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.